Welcome to a special edition of our video series featuring conversations with musicians, artists, and creative people of all sorts. For this episode, I gathered some of the smartest and kindest people I know for a discussion on COVID-19 and the effect it's had on our communities. All right, well, thanks for being willing to participate in this conversation today. Really appreciate it. And I'd just like to start by having everybody introduce themselves and kind of talk for a second about where they're coming from. So, Dean, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm Dean Phelps, and I am a performing, recording musician, and as well as that, I'm a pastor in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I currently serve as what my tribe of Christians calls a regional minister to the Christian churches in Kentucky. So a region is what other groups might call a conference or a diocese. I've got 205 congregations and about 370 clergy that I look after and have some responsibility for.
I'm Jessica Johnson. I am a pharmacist by training, and up until very recently was working for sort of the state in a role where I taught physicians and nurse practitioners and other healthcare professionals about how to treat substance use disorder and how to take care of our people who use drugs in our community, and have recently changed to a clinical role where I'll get to be doing more of that on my own. So mom, got two little boys, one of whom was at the pediatrician this morning and we found out does not have mono, which is good news.
Oh, that's great.
But yeah, really interested in, I've done a lot of work and spent a lot of time with populations of people who don't get a lot of easy life in our society. So patients who don't have a lot of housing security, patients who have inconsistent jobs or who immigrants, that kind of thing. And so really interested in how decisions that we make and policies that we make on a big level affect the lives of patients who don't really have a very easy life in our country.
I'm Bev Spurlin, but most people call me Bev. Everybody that knows me well just calls me Bev. My husband and I live in Metamora, bought a little place in the country, a cabin, started raising chickens and gardening and doing some hunting on our property. We also bought a business in Metamora, or bought a shop in Metamora 3 years ago. And I also have worked in mental health and addiction for 16 years now. I am not a clinical person. I don't have clinical training. I'm more administrative. So I do a lot of supporting the clinical staff and planning just to make sure that everybody has what they need, facilitating things between clients and their providers. So that's kind of my background.
So I'm Kyra. I live up in Marquette, Michigan. And first of all, I just want to say that my dad started the Great Lakes Recovery Centers up here. So my whole life was around, just the talking of addiction. Let's see, I have a master's degree in field biology. So I studied fish in my previous life. And then I had 6 kids. So I stay home mainly with them. Some of them are homeschooled even before this whole thing. And then my husband and I have a rental business, we do short-term and long-term rentals. In Marquette, we raise chickens and meat rabbits and bees and a little bit of gardening. It's a little hard here to garden. So, but we're trying. Actually, this year we're going to try to get some hoop houses up and stuff. So a lot of people who come in our house is kind of like an open hub usually, and Ryan knows this. And so we feel really strongly about kind of making sure that there's a strong community around our lives. And so that we've actually, some of our neighbors call us the commune on the corner. Is the nickname of our house, and have actually mistaken us for a commune with multiple families. But it was just really one big kind of extended family. So anyway, that's just kind of where I come from in terms of our lifestyle.
I can absolutely confirm all of that. It's 100% true. I want like T-shirts that say "commune on the corner." Actually, I'm just curious, what changes or impacts have you noticed in your local community from this whole situation with COVID-19?
Really, the impact we've had, some pastors in our congregations that have tested positive. Thankfully, those have recovered. We have certainly had confirmed cases in congregations and learned just this week of one death that a congregation has had. And that was in a senior living facility in a part of the state that's been especially hard hit. But those kinds of things are really starting to make this become real for folks. At the beginning, it was kind of interesting to watch all of my friends who are pastors who all of a sudden had to become producers. And they responded remarkably well. I was thankful to be able to offer some advice, some counsel to that. Well, now we're past Easter, and we've been at this 4 weeks, and you can really start to see it becoming real. I think some of the grief is starting to set in. Some of the sense of being tired has set in. I know personally, I have experienced this as anything but a great pause. I think I've worked harder in the past month than I ever have in any ministry that I've been in. But I think that's that sense of now it's becoming real. Now the grief's starting to set in is the impact that I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, I think Dean, it struck me when you were saying, it's starting to feel real to people, because I think for a lot of my friends and colleagues, it has been terrifyingly real for a long time. We have been very lucky in Kentucky that we reacted pretty quickly. We locked down pretty quickly. And so we aren't seeing a lot of the things that some of my friends are seeing in bigger cities. But I do have close personal friends who work in places like New York and Chicago, where they said it's like a movie, honestly. It's just a patient will code, and by the time you get finished with the code, and often it's not a good outcome, everything has to leave because the next patient down the hall is coding. And it's really sort of like wartime medicine for a lot of the people who are working on the front lines. And so I have a lot of worry for them, both for their exposure risk and for, I think, what that's doing to mental health, probably for a lot of those practitioners to kind of go in and have to put just a really narrow mindset in. I've got a couple of friends. I have a friend here who's a pharmacist whose daughter has cystic fibrosis, and her husband works in the emergency setting. And so he just hasn't lived at home for a month. And so things that really a lot of my colleagues are facing day in and day out. I am just 5 days into being back in a clinical setting. And even then I'm working in a cold zone, so I'm not being terribly impacted by it. But yeah, it's just really disheartening and really hard. And I feel very torn, and really dejected sometimes about, incredibly inspired by what people are doing. And the fact that most people I know are just throwing themselves right into it. This is what they signed up for. This is what they do. There's not a question. But I really hope we're taking care of those people and listening to them carefully about what needs to happen next.
Well, we live in one of the hardest hit communities, the hardest hit counties in Indiana. Franklin County has had a fairly large portion per capita of COVID positive patients. Early on, two of my coworkers had COVID symptoms. This is when we were still in the office. We've since moved, everyone's moved to home locations. But two of my coworkers that I saw on a daily basis had COVID symptoms. And my one coworker, her husband eventually passed away from the virus. He was hospitalized for about 10 days, and it was quite a terrible roller coaster ride. Because if you've known anybody and have been, on a prayer list and get updates from COVID patients, they go through these periods where it's, they're in terrible need of intervention, divine intervention, because they're so they're so critical. And then 12 hours later, they started to make a little bit of a recovery and things are starting to look better. And then, 2 hours after that, they dive again. And it was like that for about 5 days, I guess, before he did finally pass away. So living in a small community, you are affected, I guess, more because you're just, you're closer to people maybe that are in situations where they're really struggling either with their health, financial situations. I have a lot of friends who are out of work. Unemployment benefits haven't come through yet, or just, they're just beginning to get some financial relief. Some of them have not had any kind of financial relief for a month or so. So I spent a lot of time worrying about people. Do they have enough food? Do they have the basic necessities of life? So that's kind of, the small town experience, I guess. Yeah, Scott and I are gonna make a couple of big pots of chili, and we have some peanut butter sandwiches, and we're just inviting anyone in the community that just, needs a hot meal, needs to have a little bit of support to come over and grab something for dinner. We're willing to, travel, and if people are not able to get out and come and get a meal, we are happy to take that to them and do porch drops, as one of my friends calls it. So this was something that it's been on my heart for a couple of weeks, and I've been trying to discern, is this for me? I mean, is this something I'm dreaming up, or I felt like it was something that God really was inspiring me to do and encouraging me to do. And so I prayed about it and talked to Scott about it, and he agreed that was something that was kind of on his heart too. So we're just going to try. This will be the first weekend that we'll try this and see what kind of response there is, what kind of need there is. I really have no idea. I do know that there are some people that are struggling to keep food on the table. So if one or two people are blessed by this, then it will have been worth it.
Room at the inn, we call it, is our homeless population, which up here obviously is a huge problem in the winter because they have to be housed. So there's been a lot of effort for organizing of food and supplies for them, as well as I know that the food pantries are really low everywhere. So here they're encouraging people to get food to the food pantries. And then just as far as like neighborhood helping, we have like hearts, everyone puts hearts in their windows. And so then, it's like Yoopers, hearts for Yoopers or something. And so that's just, and it's like a small thing, but it's really nice to walk around town or drive around the county and you see all the hearts. We also do this like bear hunt thing where everyone would put a little bear in their window so the kids could go around and look for the bear. For Easter, it was impossible to get any like Easter supplies in town. And so like the day before Easter, the owner of Donkers, which is our candy store in town, called me and was like, hey, do you need an Easter Bunny fairy? And I was like, sure. And so she dropped off a bag of Easter chocolate in our truck bed. And so when I went out there was like, so the Easter Bunny, like just these little things, but they're just huge, right? So what you were saying, like just offering something to somebody during this time, I think it like changed my day to like the relief, being like, oh my gosh, I have something to put in my kid's Easter basket because I've been stressing and we talked to them about it. Like these are, we're going to make do. But it was so kind. And so I've been trying to think of things too, like that I could drop off. Just from being on Facebook or hearing what people are feeling like they need or like what they like, trying to, if I have that at home, go drop it off on their porch or something.
Dean, yeah, you've got some experience, especially, with the bears. I know you guys are in on that. I saw you laughing when that was brought up.
Yes. We, our neighborhood has done the bear hunt as well. And the reason I chuckled, we can laugh about it now. We have a little loft area over our garage, and my wife Deb went up to put a couple of bears in that window, and was anxious to come down and see how they looked, make sure they were visible. And on her way down, she missed the bottom step and broke her ankle.
Oh,
So I've had a really good patient to take care of. She's been great, but that's added a different wrinkle to our life in this. Kyra, you mentioned the Hearts for Youpers. One of the things that we're doing here in Kentucky is we're lighting everything up green. So when we hear of deaths from COVID-19, which is happening daily, courthouses, businesses, we have a lamp in the window with a green bulb in it, and I'm longing for the day that I don't have to turn that lamp on.
Yeah, I think the green lighting is very prevalent here too, Dean. We've got like the bridge that lights up and the soccer stadium and things like that. Obviously we are a resource-rich community, right? And so I hear a lot of stories of people watching out for each other. I think one of the things that has frustrated me is that aside from going to work, I really can't go out and do things. I'm immune compromised. And so I'm pretty high risk if I go out and try to do something functional to help. But I have been fortunate enough to maintain my job and maintain my income during this. And I've noticed that I'm a lot less spendy, right? And so if I'm not out in the community every day, there are less things coming to my mind that I'm like, oh, I need to have that. I need to have that. And that's something that I hope to keep with me past this, that intentionality about how I spend money. But that has meant that I am in a position where I can donate. And again, Louisville being what it is and having historically a population that does have a lot of need, we have a ton of really good resources in the city and in the county. So it does feel good to be able to participate in that, even if I can't be out doing it, but to be able to support organizations that still do really, really good work. And are just now being taxed to the highest potential that they have for the added burden of patients and people that they're seeing.
Oh, definitely. I'd just like to mention my little community here. We live in Wayne County, Indiana. And last night there was a Facebook Live benefit concert organized by a local musician. Cambridge City, the next town up the road from us, is where he's from. And there were like 500 people watching, and he raised like $15,000 for the Wayne County Foundation, and then a church that's operating a food bank in Connorsville. And I was just blown away by that. Like, it kind of gave me hope, actually. Like, I was feeling pretty negative like before yesterday, and I saw that, and I was like, well, maybe there's a chance that we can pull together and have something good come out of this. So
I think for me, because I'm kind of where it sounds like you were yesterday, right? I'm really kind of angry and frustrated right now, because I don't think we do a very good job taking care of people in our country. And I think that's being brought to the forefront. And I don't know, I'm not feeling great about how we come out of that. I think really on in the whole thing, I posted on Facebook one day that like most of the days I'm doing pretty well, but on days that I'm worried, it's not about whether or not I get sick. It's about whether or not we've learned anything from this. And I think it's really hard for me right now to see that we will, because I don't see that we're applying a lot of those lessons. And I don't mean like individuals. I think individuals are doing a really great job. But I don't see, like, it is very difficult for me to see that we are in Las Vegas are thinking about like, okay, well, let's make sure we spray paint these lines on this parking lot for people who don't have stable housing so that they know how far to separate themselves while we've got like 20,000 open hotel rooms. And so it's really, I'm kind of struggling with this idea of what we think we are and who we think we are as a country and what kinds of things we want to demonstrate as who we are. And the idea that we're not really that a lot of the time. And so I'm interested to hear from everybody about, where are you finding hope about how we make better decisions going forward? What kinds of lessons do you think we might learn from this? And kind of like big idea, how do we take better care of each other? And how do we demonstrate that we are who we say we are, and that everybody's going to matter, and everybody being safe and secure and having like basic needs met is something that we really, really mean. How do we just not totally feel hopeless about that all the time? Because that's where I am. And I need you guys to fix that for me. Help me find some hope in this.
One of the things I hope that I see on a day-to-day basis, I see people reaching out to each other and saying, you know, what can I do? What do you need? What can I provide to you? People that are saying, you know, my kids need my baby needs diapers. And people in the past sometimes have been critical of that and not said some not very kind things. I've seen none of that. All I've seen is people stepping up to the plate, offering what they have to share. And I think that the challenge is not in how are we helping people get through this, but how are we going to sustain that type of mentality and that type of perception and that type of response to each other. So I think we have to be intentional about that. I think we have to talk about that this can't just be people trying to help each other get through a crisis. This needs to be people trying to help each other live.
I think everybody's mental health has been affected by this, and I wonder how many people are, you know, for one, have someone that they can talk to about those kinds of issues, and two, would feel comfortable doing that, because part of American culture, and it's good and bad. There's two sides to this. You know, it's this idea of American strength. Like, we can just, you know, we can buckle down and do anything, and, you know, whatever we put our minds to. But that also doesn't leave a lot of space for struggling with mental health issues during all of that. So that hit me personally this week, because, you know, this is probably the first week of the crisis for me that I've really experienced anxiety and depression and stuff like that. And, you know, I had a couple of people reach out to me and just ask if I needed to talk about it. And that was hugely helpful.
Yeah. And also, I think not waiting for people to reach out to you. We need to, and in the, you know, when we're out and about and among people, you kind of notice, you know, your friend is kind of feeling off, or you just notice that there's something that's not quite right. So it's easier to address that. But when we're so isolated, we need to take notice of people that maybe you haven't talked to for a little bit, or that you already know are struggling, people that have already been pretty vulnerable, or, you know, have been struggling with an addiction. So I think we need to take the first step sometimes and reach out to people and just say, you know, it's okay, Brian, it's okay that you were feeling, you know, having feelings of depression, anxiety. It's normal. This is a, you know, uncharted territory. We all, yeah, it's expected. Don't feel like that's weird, or that there's something wrong with you because you're uncertain and scared and not your normal positive self.
One of my biggest concerns actually is people who are living right now with a abusive spouse or parent. That's almost very traumatizing to think about, because I can imagine. But I don't know how to. I've actually reached out to some people, mental health workers in my community, to be like, is there anything you've done about this? What can we do? And it's hard because you can't see the people, you can't see the kids at school right now, right? I mean, that's a population that is always a problem and overlooked. It's hard to get in and figure out what to do, and especially right now.
I think that's why it is so important that for those of us who are not experts on X or Y or Z, that we know what the resources are, right? So even if we can't directly help, we can be a point of connection for someone to help them get to the right place. And I say that again as someone who lives in a city that has a lot of those resources available. And so I know that that's a privilege. But I have had to kind of work with myself to say, I am not going to be able to fix all of this myself. I'm not going to be able to fix any of it myself. Like, there are direct patients that I can help and that kind of thing. But what I can do is make sure that I can help people get to the right place. Right. And so, cause I'm with you, Kyra. I worry about those patients a lot, or people, sorry, I say patients a lot. I mean, people. I worry about people in those situations. I worry about people who do have sort of underlying stress and anxiety, or in my case, especially substance use disorders, right? So like, if you are somebody who has a dependence on a drug and you cannot get that right now, I am exceptionally worried about your overdose risk. Are we going to know? And are we going to be able to get to you? I always counsel my patients who are actively using drugs that they need to do that with someone. And this is not a great time for people to be using drugs together. So I think a lot of things that when we're already trying to kind of stitch together that safety net, and then we have this big crisis that is really overwhelming to think about the ways in which those populations are being even more adversely affected. But yeah, a very basic starting step that I think most of us can do is just know what's available, so that even if we can't fill that gap, we can help point them in the right direction.
I think, Brian, like you, this has been the week that's been challenging for me. This has been the week when it's been hardest to maintain my social media rule. and my personal social media rule is I don't post anything on social media that I wouldn't say from a pulpit. And it's been hard. It's been hard this week. You know, and it is, you know, now I can come back and look at it with a pastor's eyes, you know, now that we're starting to see protests here in Kentucky and other places, and I get that people are impatient. I get that we want to get back to normal. There's a part of me that is coming into this with a little bit of pessimism. I mean, I lived in Atlanta when they hosted the 1996 Olympics. And at that time, while the Olympics were going on, you could not drive into downtown Atlanta. And we didn't have the technology then that would enable, you know, so many of us that, you know, I'm able to telework now. I don't have to go to an office to do what I do. We didn't have that technology then. And so, folks, if you had to go into downtown Atlanta to work, you had to take mass transit. You had to take the train to get into downtown, and I thought, this is wonderful. We'll have 2 weeks of using mass transit. People get used to it. They'll realize it's not all bad, that you can sit there and read, you can work while you're on your commute. That brown haze that I'm used to seeing as I'm flying into and out of Atlanta is gonna dissipate. And as soon as the closing ceremonies were done, we were back in our individual cars and driving it downtown. So I think there's how are we starting to wrap our brains around that? Getting back to something that feels like normal is going to take us a long time, and the thing that's eventually going to feel like normal isn't going to be what we were doing 5 and 6 weeks ago. I really do appreciate, you know, Bev, you brought up that there are a lot of, you know, to go back and draw on President Bush, there really are those 1,000 points of light out there. There are a lot of people doing really good things. I would love to see us be able to lift those up more and more. You know, watching the Spinoza's concert last night and realizing, okay, we're thinking about this particular population of workers that aren't able to work right now. So a lot of good individual things going on. How can we lift those up and really point out that at our core, we're basically good people. Yeah, what seems to get the airplay is some of the ugliness and some of the selfishness. But at our core, we're really good people.
Can I play devil's advocate on that for a minute?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian knows me well enough to know that that's probably the role he asked me to come on here and play.
Yep.
So I agree. And I do think it's important that we recognize those things and we focus on those things. I work with patient populations and with populations by virtue of being in a bigger city that don't look like me and that don't have my life experiences. And the thing that does continue to just really hurt my heart and really has, I think, kept me in this place of pessimism about this is that most of those actions that I see are people stepping out to help people who look and feel like them. And that's where I really, really struggle. Because I do think we are really good at when something hits kind of close to home and makes us uncomfortable, really good at stepping up to fill that need. But I think the needs that are continually present in our community very, very often affect groups of people that don't look like me, that don't have my advantages, that haven't had the life experiences that I have. And that's where I see us not doing a good job a lot of the time. And that's where I see us putting a lot of, again, I work with patients who have substance use disorders. And for the last 18 months have been in a role where I'm trying to convince largely Eastern Kentucky clinicians that that's not their fault and that you have to treat those patients as a disease state, right? And so I do feel like there are those thousands of points of light, but I do think like on a broad basis, we are not good at recognizing that a lot of what people struggle with are not things that they have brought on themselves. And I think to the extent that we in America, like rightfully so, I think really recognize that we are a land of great opportunity and hold up examples of people who have done very, very well for themselves as kind of like an idealized, okay, I can get to that point. We are very eager to think about that, but we are very uncomfortable thinking about the people who have not had success with that. And I think kind of subconsciously because we're like, oh crap, that could be me too. Right. And so that is where I'm kind of stuck and where I'm struggling and that's where my pessimism is coming in, is that I do see a lot of really good things happening in our communities. I don't see us making big wholesale changes to fix some of the things that brought us to this point, and that this is really driving home as really underlying basic iniquities, and that's hard.
And I agree with you, Jessica. I think where my anger comes out at the protests that I'm seeing is what I'm hearing is language that is very much about me, my liberty, my stuff, and we cloud it in us language. We say things like these politicians work for us. What we really mean is me. If I were hearing anything in this about how African Americans are disproportionately dying from this disease, then I would listen to the protest with different ears. But short of hearing that, and I think some of it stems from that Protestant work ethic that Brian alluded to earlier. That I work hard, I establish myself, and because of my hard work, I have gotten to these places, and that's just not true.
Right.
Everybody. A lot of the folks that you're talking about, I know, are some of the hardest working people.
Yes.
And they're just continually kept at a disadvantage by the systems that keep them at a disadvantage.
I'm kind of curious. I've been thinking about this since we brought up the protests. What is going on with this?
You want to hear my conspiracy theory?
Yes.
It's Russian trolls.
Maybe.
And I'm only halfway joking.
Right.
I really think there is some social media interference out there that's kind of bringing us to this. I don't know. Tell me that I'm wrong. Prove me wrong, please.
Well, I mean, I know in Michigan, In Michigan, there were some, right-wing groups like the Betsy DeVos's foundation that they found was influencing the protest. And Betsy DeVos has got, the DeVos Foundation has had agenda for decades to undermine unions and break up public schools and different things like that. And somehow this all fits into their motivation.
Well, I think it fits into what we were talking about too, right? Like if you are someone who is exceptionally comfortable and had a great deal of power and wealth, you have a real need and motivation to keep that system the same.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer this goes on, I mean, I really see this as more of like a foundational big change event like World War II, right? And so if you're somebody who sees it like that and says, okay, we can't come out of this the same, there is no going back to normal because normal didn't work, and this is our opportunity to redefine who we are and like put into place things that align with what we say we believe in, then you see it that way. If you see it as, holy crap, I'm about to lose my whole 401k or my house in Aspen or whatever, then you have a real strong incentive to go back to exactly what we had before.
I have wondered, because I'm too, I've kind of compared this to, my parents were part of that greatest generation.
Mm-hmm.
And the story in the history books is really about how we as a nation banded together, we shared sacrifice, we participated in rationing. That's the story in the history books. Did we see this same kind of unrest, this same kind of how long can this go on then that we do now? And it's just that part of the story has been more or less forgotten. I wonder about that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting question. And if I could play devil's advocate for a moment on this, I think the basic fact of the matter is that for a lot of people that live around me here, this is breaking them financially. So it's not coming from a position of wealth and power and I want everything to stay the same. It's literally, I have no money coming in. I don't know when I'm going to get unemployment because the system is so backlogged.
Right.
And if I don't get back to work right now, I'm not going to be able to put food on the table and pay my rent. So,
I totally agree with that. And I see the same thing. It's like, people are forced to make a choice between what they know is is happening right now. They don't have money to pay their bills. They don't have money to put food on the table. And what might happen, they might go out and back into the community in public, and they might contract this horrible virus. But so that's a terrible position for people to be in. And I think that's why there's so much conflict. There's so much interpersonal turmoil, even in recognizing that, yes, it is good that we've isolated. It is causing the numbers to go down. However, I got to get back to work. I've got to feed my family. So I don't know the answer. I don't know how you reach a balance for people that are really depending on going back to work.
I think probably the hardest part for me to grasp about the unrest and the protests and stuff this week, and just some of the angry stuff I've seen from local people on social media, is that the perception and the reality are like totally different worlds. Because Indiana, I think, in my opinion, not to get too like personal with politics and stuff like that, but I really think our governor has done a great job of handling this. Mm-hmm. And the stay-at-home order is pretty much just, please stay at home. There's nothing we can really do to make you stay at home, but please, just for the good of the community, stay home. And then I've got these people on my feed that are saying it's tyranny and it's oppression. Y'all live down the street from me. Like, where is this tyranny you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm similarly proud of Kentucky's governor, and really proud that I don't miss Andy at 5. And really just very excited that now Kentucky is part of, we're going to work with Indiana and work with Ohio, and Michigan and Illinois and Minnesota. We're going to come out of this together. There's no, so yeah, I kind of scratch my head too and go, well, wait a minute, who really is, taking your rights away from you here? Where is the tyranny?
Yeah. Well, and I recognize that people are scared, and I don't want to minimize that, because if I weren't able to still work, I don't know how I would pay my bills, right? And so I know that that's a thing, but it is not tyranny to have to stay home in your comfortable house. You know what I mean? Like, I saw, was it Ellen, I think, that compared this to jail? Like, oh, this is jail because then there's some off-color joke about her wife or something. But I was like, no, like, that is so insensitive. Like, I have so many patients and friends who have been through the criminal justice system. This is not jail to sit at home and watch TV in your very, very pretty house on the ocean. It's just like, it's an important thing that we're doing. And I think, honestly, Brian, you asked a question on your list about, like, we're using the word hero a lot with people who are in healthcare or in non-essential or in essential jobs and things. And I cannot speak for people who are working in essential jobs outside of healthcare. But I would say for my friends who are in healthcare, they are appreciative of that. And they are appreciative that people are recognizing what they do. More than anything, what would mean a lot to them is for people to continue to take this seriously. And to recognize that the reason we are seeing things start to fall off is because of the exact things that we're doing. And that doesn't mean that that's when we kind of turn it around. But I've got friends who are working in direct contact with aerosolized coronavirus who don't have appropriate PPE. And that is a terrifying thing. We would not send my brother into battle without all of the equipment and all of the weaponry that he needs. And that is how these people feel on the front lines who don't have the appropriate equipment. And so I think more than anything, what would mean a lot to people who are in those positions is to recognize the sacrifices that they're making, and to not just say, oh, you're my hero, but to really mean that by continuing to do the things that we really need to do, and to not move too quickly, and that testing has to be in place and comprehensive, and equipment has to be much, much more stable before we can even talk about things like going back to the movies, which sucks. I'm worried about getting to go to Door County in July. I already had to lose my nose ring because I couldn't get it back in after my MRI. Like, stupid things, I know. Those are things that matter to me. But it's so scary to think about what could happen. And this would have been for nothing if we just release it too early and go back to February.
Yeah, one group of unsung heroes in my circle is the folks that are serving as chaplains. And connecting with them, talking with them. Their life has changed too. They can't go on wing like they used to. A lot of their ministry is really to, if you're in a clinical setting, it's to hospital staff. They can't visit patients like they used to. And I'm thinking, as a patient, it kind of sets the mark that if the chaplain's coming to see you, it's a message about how dire your condition is. So those folks, again, right up there with the medical professionals. I tip my hat to the chaplains.
And I have a friend who's a director of a funeral home, and in Detroit, and it's hard for, it's the same thing. They can't, they're so used to this, the delicacy of dealing with families that are grieving, and they don't have time anymore. They can't, for safety reasons, meet with their clients. They have, bags of that they're trying to get to the crematorium in time, yet there's only so many that can go per day. And I mean, stuff I hadn't thought about that, is really intense. Our ritual around death is being changed. We're not allowed, we can't have funerals during a time when death is so rampant. My neighbor 2 houses down just died, and he just, the 10 people or whatever were able to go to bury him. I mean, he didn't die of the virus. He he was actually at D-Day. You know, he's a
Wow.
World War II hero. And it just kind of a blip, because that's all you can do right now. And that's just really sad sounding, sad.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the cruel things about this whole situation, the virus itself, is how it's forced us to isolate out of, the need to protect ourselves. But, people that are dying are isolated from loved ones. Their loved ones aren't able to properly grieve, or what in our tradition of properly grieving, which means, people come over and hug you and console you and bring you food, and that's taken away too. So there's such a sense of loss, not just in the loss of your loved one, but the loss of just the whole tradition of grieving and comforting people.
Yeah.
My dad has stage 4 cancer. He lives right up the street, and he had just gone into hospice like the same week that kind of we went into isolation. So it's been about 5 weeks. And this was kind of, he got off all of his radiation, chemo, going into hospice, and hoping to have maybe a good kind of 4 to 6 months with our family. My brother and his family lived downstate. They were going to come out for Easter. So this was our time to be with my dad. He's actually feeling okay right now. And so that's probably the toughest thing. My kids are used to going up and down they live like literally a block and a half up. My kids go up there every day. They can't now. So, I mean, my dad and mom will come down and we wait from the porch every other day, or we walk up and that's what we have right now. And so that's I think the one thing for me where I'm like, okay, when is this going to end? Because when am I going to get to see my dad? Like I just, in my head, I think June, and I can go with that. If it goes longer than that, I think I will start to panic too, because I'm going to be like, well, this is the last days to be with my dad. Don't get to be. And so I think that is one of the things that made me really angry last week as well. I think Brian and I have talked about that. Last week was kind of a turning point for me too, where it was like, why are you going out and endangering everyone and protesting because you can't fish from a motorboat right now? Like, there's people who, have loved ones dying. There's people who can't see their fathers who are dying, and that was my personal thing. But I have friends I have a friend who her husband is a doctor, and she has a child with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
He went on call, and he hasn't been able to come back for 4 weeks because they're afraid that he's been exposed, and they cannot risk their child. So there's people who are really, or like I said, the people who are living with an abusive spouse. These are people that have a right to be upset and angry. Mm-hmm. Not because you don't get to go fishing or, have easy access to seeds right now. Like, just, we're all making a sacrifice, and that's not.
Is there anything that's jumping out that strikes you as positive, looking towards making, substantive change in our own communities over the next few months?
I will speak quickly on one positive thing that I have seen as far as mental health and substance use treatment. We have traditionally used clients come to the office, they meet face-to-face for their session. We've had groups that come and meet face-to-face, and there's been, some barriers as far as transportation, different things that, since we've moved to this model of telehealth, it seems like some of those barriers have really been lifted. Some of our addiction clients, don't have transportation because they've lost their license because of legal consequences. So the show rate and the engagement rate for those clients in the setting of Zoom meetings has really increased. And it's also given some of them who are more introverted and socially, not as comfortable in social situations. They've been more vocal, they've been more engaged. So that's definitely a positive. The show rate for individual sessions has increase because the therapist is the one initiating they're calling or initiating the contact with the client. So I think that's definitely a positive thing that has come out of this. And hopefully we can maintain some of that after it's not so vital to be isolated.
Yeah, I think so. On the medication management side of substance use disorders, we're seeing the same thing, right? So the laws that really regulate what we're allowed to do and when we're allowed to prescribe and that kind of thing are very, very restrictive, despite really good evidence that those medicines work really well. And those have been not completely lifted for us, but we've got a lot more flexibility right now, which is allowing a lot more people to have good access. And I'm hopeful that that is a good demonstration of the very ideas that you were talking about before with stigma and things like these are patients that we can trust. And these are patients with whom we build a real rapport, and they don't have to be managed as strictly and carefully as they were before. Because I do think that kind of leads to worse outcomes, right? Everything about how we treat that disorder right now says, I don't trust you. And so I'm hopeful that a lot of those regulations are permanently lifted as well. I think that's a good point.
I think the emergence of telehealth could have a very positive impact on our healthcare system.
Yeah.
And really, economically access. I think it could be a very positive change.
The other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the environmental impact of just the fact that we're not, for Molly and I, driving 50,000 miles a year right now. I've certainly thought about that a lot. Kyra and I have had many conversations about, sort of this juxtaposition that our job kind of hurts the environment a lot.
I mean, for me, I think that's kind of it has been a big eye opener. I mean, because I've been an environmental activist my whole life. So the idea that, wow, that actually it was pretty quick that stuff started to turn around was really eye opening and hopeful. And it's also really scary because I have this huge hope that everyone's eyes have been opened and we're like, we're not going to travel as much and we don't need to be doing these things, which is in something that bursts for me in a month or two. That's going to be hard because I have this, I really have this hope that we'll learn from that and maybe be able to implement like some more strategy with global climate change because of it. And pollution, especially in, larger cities with higher poverty rates and everything where people are living in really dirty conditions and polluted air and having health conditions about it. Like I just saw pictures of New Delhi where they see the sun for the first time. And if global climate change becomes even more of a crisis than COVID-19, which I think will happen in the next, few decades, can we slow it? But it looks like we actually could change it very quickly if we worked at it. If we just all sacrificed, or at least those of us who can. I understand that some people cannot. And that's where the people who can, I feel privileged enough that I can do some things.
I can interject on that just briefly. I went to a music business conference in Austin last year. My wife and I both went. And it was great, but now looking at it in retrospect, there's pretty much nothing at that conference that couldn't have been presented online. Like, we drove to Austin, which is about 1,000 miles, and sure, we picked up a couple of gigs along the way to go with it since we were going down anyway. But essentially, we drove 2,000 miles to go to this conference that we could have attended online from our living room. So if more conferences, events, if more businesses, rather than just the automatic response being, we'll just put you on a plane and fly you out there. If people could just start thinking about stuff like that, I think just, exponentially it would have a pretty huge impact.
I know the conference that you attended, and in ways I feel like I learned a lot of the same things because I listened to their podcast.
Yeah.
But I have the same kind of response. What the work that I do every Sunday morning would find me driving to some congregation somewhere in Kentucky, evenings going to meet with committees and boards. And now I've not bought gasoline since March 5th. Now that presence is an important part of what I do. Showing up has a lot to do with formats like this being able to work, but it does have me thinking now, how do I balance that? How do I know when it really is essential for me to get in the car and go and be physically in the room with folks, and when can we just get on a call together and talk through whatever's going on?
I think too, like, we're talking about big events and conferences and things like that, but I think we are finding out that a lot of work doesn't have to be done at work through this. Like, there are a lot of us who have been able to move our roles home. And up until last Friday, I was one of them. So my office was in Frankfurt and I live in Louisville. It's about 45 minutes each direction. I drove 40,000 miles last year, and that wasn't even being in Frankfurt full time. But if you think about people who drive 15 or 20 minutes to work every day, and if they can only do that once or twice a week and continue to do ththink at home, or how much we've all kind of started to get in the mindset of, okay, I'm leaving the house, so this is my time to leave house this week. I'm going to combine all my trips and that kind of thing. Like, I think those are really achievable, easy things that make a huge impact when we do them on a broad scale. So it doesn't even have to be massive events and things like that. But if we're all just intentionally thinking a little bit more each day about minimizing our trips and that kind of thing, and working with employers to say how much of this really has to have somebody in a car coming to an office, that's a huge opportunity.
One more thing, which is kind of related, but is food production, I think. And I like to call it food freedom. So, I mean, the freedom to be able to grow and produce your own food, which since I think World War II-ish, it was a huge thing, and then it got taken from a lot of communities. Marquette worked really hard the last few years to allow us to have meat rabbits, to have bees and laying hens. And it was huge because like right now, I went out to my rabbit barn on the day that we started kind of isolating and just cried because I was so grateful to them, because even though I can still go and get my meat, it suddenly felt like that might someday not be the case. And I have a barn full of meat, and I have my hens that can lay. It also just, it's hard for me to grow in my space, and I'm trying to learn. I'm not that great of a gardener. I'm better at butchering than growing, but
we all have our gifts.
But I go to my local farmer in town, my farmers markets, and I just feel like supporting them right now is so huge. And it's also, I just read an article that like 15% of the meat production in the country is being shut down, and I'm not worried about that, because that's not where I ever get my meat, and that makes me feel really good. And I hope that that is something that gets highlighted out of this, is again, like, champion our small growers and making, and everyone else kind of thinking, hey, maybe I will start to grow things or try having animals, and allowing that in communities and in townships, changing the zoning so that we can have that more.
Well, I just noticed, I guess, how thankful I am to be connected with people that are just so giving and so uplifting and positive. I think we're very blessed to be in the community that we're in, not just geographically, but people that we're connected to and can stay in contact with, because of technology. And there are times, in the past 4 or 5 weeks that I've sort of been on the verge of panic, but because of those connections and, people reaching out to me and me reaching out to other people and feeling a sense of community, I think it mitigates that quite a bit. And so I'm just very thankful that we've had this opportunity to grow that community.
I feel very much the same. I think this conversation is an example of what's kept me going through this. You know, to know that I have this community of friends, circles of church folks, fellow pastors, circles of musicians, and knowing, having some sense of confidence that we really are going to get through this. The day is coming when we will sit down together in the same room and make music together. We will sit down and have these kind of conversations over a cup of coffee. This kind of setting, this kind of community gives me a lot of that hope.
No, it's been great to meet all of you and have this conversation. I'll leave you with so all the storefronts in Marquette are closed, but on each window is a sign that says "Stay calm and you're on." So
All right, Jess, take us home. I'll give you the final word.
Trust science. I mean,
Yeah.
They know what they're talking about. Be patient. We'll get there. But yeah, let's let that guide things.
We're presented by our patrons on Patreon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And trust science.